Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the island of Sodor. He's a cheeky little engine with 6 small wheels, a short stumpy funnel, a short stumpy boiler, and a short stumpy dome.
It's pretty common knowledge now that the E2 tank engine wasn't the best or most useful engine. If you don't or haven't heard such, I highly recommend giving Train of Thought's video a watch, but to summarize, the E2 tank engine wasn't the best performer. They had very small coal bunkers, meaning they constantly had to refuel. The engines would oscillate at high speeds, and altogether the engine just wasn't great for much besides shunting. But even then there would be issues, as the locomotive had a very long wheelbase. So, if that's already pretty common knowledge, what's the point of this video? Well, today we'll be taking the E2, more widely accepted as what Thomas is now, and putting him against, well, the other Thomases. Other Thomases, you may be thinking? Yes, the other Thomases. Thomas hasn't been just portrayed as an E2 tank engine, and today we'll be taking a look at those other 2 locomotive references and seeing how they fare up against the E2. We'll be taking the locomotive's history, fuel, water capacity, traction power, and inevitably looks into account to decide if any of such end up being a better alternative to the current E2 design that Thomas is. I'll be doing my best to keep personal opinions out of this video. I want this to come down to just the simple facts about the locomotives themselves. So let's go ahead and get into it then, starting with the Jinty. The LMS Fowler 3F060T is a class of steam locomotive also known as a Jinty. They're said to represent the ultimate development of the Midland Railway's 6-coupled tank locomotives. These engines could easily reach speeds of up to 60 miles an hour, and a total of 422 were produced between 1924 and 1931, all designed by Henry Fowler. Their wheel configuration is 060, and currently there are 9 preserved in the world. Visually, there are several ticks that we can go ahead and mark off the list. 6 small wheels, a shorter stumpy funnel, and a dome, but unfortunately a quite large boiler. There's also the obvious issue being that this locomotive does not have extended water tanks. But looking past that, the locomotive at least sorta looks like Thomas. Audrey would actually make a model of Thomas that was based from a Jinty, and many people, myself included, are either working on or have models of Thomas if he was a Jinty. So to find an idea of what such would look like, you don't really have to go far. They're even used for Day Out with Thomas events. However, were these locomotives better than the E2? Would Thomas still be able to do his work as a Jinty? Well, on the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, Jintys were initially chosen as the standard shunting locomotive for the War Department, but later the more modern Hunslet Austerity 060STs were chosen in preference. Nevertheless, 8 of these were dispatched to France, that being before its fall in 1940, and only 5 would return in 1948. As sad as that may be, that at least tells us that shunting wasn't unheard of for these locomotives. To be considered for the War Department, I also assume they were pretty good at their job. In the 1940s and 50s, some Jintys were allocated to Bromsgrove Station, apologies now if I butchered that, which was at the foot of one of the steepest railway-worked inclines in the British Isles. The gradient itself was so steep that George Stephenson warned that such a gradient would prove unworkable for steam traction. This, however, would be proved wrong by the Jinty tank engines. These engines were often paired in 2s or 3s, and on rare occasions even 4s, and banked mainline passenger and goods trains up the incline to the now closed Blackwell Station, which was on the top of the hill. While this would still require engines to stack up, I still feel as if it's a testament to the power the Jintys puffed with. I also feel like Thomas's branch line wouldn't have had the same sort of stakes either. So right about now, in terms of the Jinty, everything's sounding quite dandy. But it's not all great, and we start to see that when we look at the specifics. What you're looking at now is both the water capacity and fuel capacity of the Jintys and E2s. As you can see, in these regards, it seems the Jinty isn't much better than the E2. This makes it hard to argue that in a technical basis, the Jinty would provide much of a difference in terms of constant refueling or for longer trips. Even in tractive effort, which you're looking at now, the Jinty ends up falling short, apparently having even less than the E2, which honestly is kinda shocking. Things looked so great for the Jinty class, but on paper, it's not looking like the difference is one that would be improved upon much. Not only that, but the issue of a longer wheelbasis is still very much present as well, and I figure this would still make negotiating smaller curves pretty hard. Unfortunately, there's not much change there at all either. But what else could Thomas have been? Is there another loco Thomas could be that could help with this performance? Well, for that, we also look at Audrey's models, but this time not the model trains, rather his wooden toy J50 Thomas and his older illustrations. As some of you guys know, I even have this one tattooed on my arm. For those who don't know, in the beginning, Thomas was for a very brief period portrayed as a J50 tank engine, and I myself have to wonder, is that any better? Personally, I don't really know a whole lot about the J50, so let's take a look and find out. Visually, it's even more awkward than the Jinty. Let's go ahead and establish that. But where this locomotive really shines is in the specifics and statistics. The Great Northern Railway Class J23, or the J50, like the others, is a class of 060T steam locomotive. They had long side tanks that came to the front of the smoke box, which sloped forwards to improve visibility, and believe it or not, these engines were designed by Nigel Gresley. About 102 would be produced between 1930 and 1939. What you're looking at now is both the tractive effort of the J50 and the E2, and in tractive power, this locomotive definitely beats out the E2, if only by a slight margin, but definitely a considerable one. What you're looking at now is the water and fuel capacity of both. It even beats out the E2, and thus also the Jinty, in its overall water and fuel capacity, automatically giving it a longer range without refueling for longer trips. But were they ever used for such? Well, these engines were used for local goods and coal workings, with shunting at intermediate yards. In the 1920s, they would also occasionally work passenger work and banking duties. So yes, not only for passenger work, but shunting work as well. So where are they now? Well, all of the J50s were built in Doncaster, except the last 14 which were built at Gorton. Further orders placed in 1939 and 1941 totaling 25 more locomotives were cancelled in 1942. 7 would survive as departmental stock until 1965, but in September of 1965, the class would become extinct, when departmental number 14 was withdrawn and scrapped. This was the last J50, so none of them actually survived into preservation. So unfortunately, that digs a bit of a sad hole around our original Thomas, doesn't it? But there's one factor I haven't talked about yet concerning the J50s, and it's the downfall of all of these locomotives, especially in a more enclosed shunting environment, the wheelbase. This locomotive is quite long, and as such, the wheelbase for it is as well. This would, just like the last, prove very troubling in enclosed shunting spaces. Everything else about the locomotive looks great, but there's the glaring issue of it being too long, and that's on basically all of these engines. However, I can't help but think, maybe I'm looking into this a bit too hard. Thomas is, by most accounts, a modified E2, so it's arguable that a lot of the issues that he faces are cured with those. However, if you're like me and appreciate the technicality of things, it's not quite as simple as that. It's not up to me to choose what Thomas would be the better Thomas, nor is that the point of this video. More to put the Thomas we know head to head with the other Thomases and see if any outperform the E2. And while this information tells us that Audrey may have had a superior operating locomotive from the start, and should that have been his goal, I believe that's what he would have stuck with, but notice that he doesn't, and there's a reason for such. I personally am not Audrey, so I couldn't tell you what exactly he thought, but the J50 was and is a jarring locomotive, and a large one at that. What is one of the essential traits of Thomas? Well, he's a small engine. The J50 would have definitely made that mark a bit more of a stretch. The Jinty, while better, is still very much a larger engine. Once it's all said and done, all of these locomotives are honestly quite large, even the E2 in real life. So what should this video tell you? That we should be happy with Thomas as an E2? That there could have been better? Personally, I'm just happy that Audrey left us with such things to think about. What do you guys think the best Thomas would be? Be sure to let me know in the comments, and if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know as well. I wouldn't mind making more of these. This was honestly kind of fun. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for even more train content. There's always more stuff on the way, and as always, thank you guys again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.